and even written things about them in his books.
How can a woman or Prabhupada's female disciples, how did they, maybe I can't ask you that one, but women coming to the movement and reading things in Prabhupada's books, which
I think what happens with females that come to the movement, that they talk with other females and they find out that there's actually no philosophically no prejudice against someone because of gender, but if they're observing from the outside.
If you're observing from the outside.
But if you're observing from the outside, then it looks like women are definitely, relegated to an inferior role.
Was there some mistakes made on the part of different disciples of Srila Prabhupada in interpreting what he said in regards to women?
Some men thought it was sanctioned to beat their wives. So that's an example of misinterpreting Prabhupada's mood and what Prabhupada was teaching.
What was Prabhupada's mood in regards to his female disciples?
Well, I don't know if Prabhupada's mood was. I don't know what Prabhupada's mood was in regards to women exactly, but I've heard on good authority that he wanted one of the women to be a leader in the GBC back in the 60s. So Prabhupada, access to Prabhupada by the female gender was greater in the earlier days, but it was greater for even men in those days. I myself had very little access to Prabhupada in the later years.
Okay, thank you. I'll just check. How are we going for about 5 minutes or so?
Yeah.
Okay. So just moving on to some of the context of that time in terms of the backlash that the movement was receiving. There seemed to be, from someone who wasn't there, this like fear of the unknown that people had, that's sort of, that the movement was confronted with. That when you challenge common thought, there's always going to be some backlash. Could you speak to the context of the time that the movement was happening in?
When the movement first began in the United States, people were, as they still are in the United States, very, very full of themselves. To coin a phrase, not coin it, but to use a phrase that I've heard, full of themselves, very proud because they have the best universities, the best education, the best, most powerful army, the most influence. They have all the big computer companies. So it so happened that when Hare Krishna first started out in that country, people really felt very challenged and they had to destroy this fantasy before it got out of hand.
At that time, there seemed to be, and going into the 80s, I know, there was this growing fear of the cult, this sense of you're going to take our children and convert them to your ideologies and we're never going to see them again. Is the Hare Krishna movement considered like a cult, or is it a bona fide religion? How were you presented with these kind of issues at that time?
Whether the Hare Krishna movement is a cult or a bona fide religion varies from place to place. There was a movement in the United States called the anti-cult movement or the deprogramming movement, which propagated the idea that if you join the Hare Krishnas or a cult, that you'd never see this person again, and they were going to disappear into the belly of a very destructive organization. But in England and India and many other places, that wasn't the case at all. People thought it was a very good thing.
So it was largely in America that this anti-cult sentiment started?
That's where the anti-cult movement started in the United States, mainly in Southern California. But it's since then become less and less powerful.
You had around that time, or maybe, I think it was just after Prabhupada left the planet, like the Jonestown incident, and what were people fearful about that you came across in your role as PR? Why were they fearful of the Hare Krishnas and this cult?
When the Jonestown tragedy occurred, the anti-cult movement sort of felt, they got some succor, some support from this, and they thought that okay, well, there's several other organizations around this country that could become Jonestown oriented, so they got a lot of strength from it. But a lot of people just didn't feel that Hare Krishnas were destructive, or they would ever commit suicide or anything like that. It's just that, and there was a lot of propaganda about the dangers of the Hare Krishna movement in those days. And when things like the Jonestown tragedy occurred, they got a little more strength, and they even migrated into England and to other countries, and like Russia. There's a bit of an anti-cult movement in those countries.
What was
Not
some
very
of the
strong, but